All right, guys, in this video, I'm going to talk about keyframe interpolation. So this is our last animation topic. This one is a little bit trickier, but you can do a lot of cool stuff with it. So I think it's worth talking about a little bit. So I'll explain the concept and then I'll show an example. So what I'm talking about is keyframe interpolation. Okay, interpolation is basically just a big word that is describing how we do the math to get from one keyframe to another. So we already know what keyframes are. Keyframes are these like little diamond things that save some information. And if we want to animate our circle from here to here, basically this keyframe says, this is 0, and this keyframe says this is 100. And then it does the math in between these points. So depending on how many frames you have, let's say we have, 5 frames. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's just going to do the math. The basic interpolation is just going to do the math to figure out how far we have to move each frame to make that animation work. So if we're trying to go 100 pixels over 5 frames, we're going to go 20, 40, 60, 80. Pretty simple. And so that's what interpolation is. It's the math. It's the equation that we use to decide where to place these keyframes. So once we do that, then After Effects just places our circle or whatever we're animating at those positions as we, go across the screen. So that's called linear interpolation. And linear is basically just taking whatever that animation is. So position is easy to visualize, but this is true for opacity or size or scale or rotation, any of these other things. It's basically just taking that line and dividing it evenly by the number of frames that we want to see our animation happen over. What we're going to look at now is that we can do other types of interpolation. So we can say, actually what we want to do is we want to go fast at the beginning and slow at the end. So we're going to put more of the balls here, and then we're going to go slower towards the end. Or we can do the opposite. We can go really fast at the beginning, so we're going to move farther, and then we're going to have more frames at the end, so we kind of slow down. And so we'll look at how to edit that because it is a little tricky in After Effects, and then we'll see some of the effects that we can get by changing the default interpolation. So I'm going to use my circle for this animation, and I'm going to use this like little beginning part. So let's open up my position animation here, and I'm just going to focus in on this section at the beginning. So let's go in here, and so we see the circle kind of drops down, and then I should have added a keyframe in here. It kind of like shifts to here and then starts this animation, but actually I should probably put a keyframe right here. So I'm just going to click on this keyframe here and copy and then paste, Command or Control C, Command Control V. And so now that circle will stay there, and then it'll start to wiggle around over here. Okay, so what I'm going to focus on is actually this falling animation right here. And so, most things in the real world don't fall at a constant rate. Things get faster as they fall down, or, in other circumstances, you can imagine like a runner running a race. They might start slow and then speed up at a certain point. They might get really fast towards the end, but then they're going to, once they cross the finish line, they're going to slow down really quickly. So things don't usually happen at one constant rate. They usually happen at different rates over time. If we look at this line, you can see that each dot on the line represents a position of our circle as it falls down the canvas. And you can see it's very even. It's linear interpolation. So it just goes from one dot to the other, and it's just evenly divided over time. So we get this very sort of, neutral, digital, non-realistic, smooth animation. That's not how things really move in the real world. Things that have weight or different properties are going to fall at different rates. They're going to accelerate. They're going to do different things. So we can imitate that using keyframe interpolation. So if you just want to change the interpolation really quickly, you can select one of your keyframes in this view and right click, and then there's a few options. So you can change it to a hold keyframe. This means that there's no animation at all. So that's one style of interpolation. So if I change both of these to hold, you're going to see that it just goes from one point to the next. So hold interpolation is it just kind of, there's no calculation in between. It just goes from one place to the next. Linear interpolation is the default for After Effects. Not for every animation program, but for After Effects it is. And we see this just even spacing of keyframes. Now, if I change this, if I go to keyframe interpolation, I have a couple of options here. There's temporal interpolation, so this is how it affects over time. Spatial interpolation, the shape of the path, and there's a couple other options here. So I'm just going to go to time interpolation, and I'm going to go to Bezier and click OK. So it's very subtle, but you probably noticed the keyframe shift a little bit. If I hit undo and then redo, notice those dots just moving just a little bit. And what's happening is the top of this animation is stretching out a little bit, and the bottom of this animation is condensing a little bit. So what's happening is it's going a little bit faster and then slowing down. So it's very subtle, but you can kind of see that happening. And then if I do the same thing to my first keyframe, so I'm going to click on this keyframe, and I have to right click and go to keyframe interpolation and go to Bezier. Now it's going to do the same thing. So now it's slow. It goes slow at the beginning, it speeds up in the middle, and it slows down at the end. So this might be not a natural falling motion, but it's a little bit of a more natural motion for physics in general. So it kind of speeds up a little bit and then it slows to a stop. So that's one way that we can edit our interpolation, but we don't have a lot of options here. And so if this is something you really want to play with, there's also a keyframe assistant where you can do more stuff. But if you really want to play with this, then we need to go over to the keyframe graph editor. So if I click on this little button here, it brings me into a different view. And you can actually see, right now the keyframes just show time, and we kind of know what the difference of the values is. But if I go to the graph editor, you actually see the graph of that change. And so we can see the red represents the X position of the circle. It doesn't change at all because it's just falling straight down on the Y-axis. And then the green represents the change on the Y-axis. So it starts over here at -300 something, and then it goes all the way to 550 here. And so we can actually see that, change over time. If you want to edit here, this can be a little tricky, but you can actually edit here. So one thing I recommend, there's a button here to separate the dimensions. So if I click on that, we can actually see our separate dimensions, and then I can just click on the Y dimension position here. So now I don't see the X. So this gives me a little bit more. I can just focus on one thing. I don't have to worry about accidentally editing my X position. The next thing I can do is I can click on this button to see the whole animation, or just like I can in my regular view, I can kind of zoom into this section. So then if I want to edit these keyframes, I can also move this way. If I'm holding space bar and then I click and drag, I can move back and forth. So now I can edit these keyframes. So I'm going to edit first the ending position. So where it ends up is this dot right here. And you can actually drag these around. So you can actually edit the keyframes right here in terms of time, which is left and right, or in terms of the actual value, which is up and down. I'm not going to do that right now. What I'm going to do is change the interpolation. So there's a few different buttons down here which will add some interpolation for you. So you can convert to linear, convert to Bezier. Bezier just means like a smooth curve. It's just a math function for calculating a curve. So I'm going to click ease in. And so what this does is it eases into that position. So that means it goes faster and then slower. So if I really exaggerate this a lot, you'll see it's going fast and then it eases in slowly over time. I gotta go back over here. I'm gonna let's set my loop section so I can just focus on this. So I'm gonna set my bottom section here and here. So that way I don't have to find it again if I go past it. Okay, so it just kind of eases in. If I go in the other way, it's gonna speed up as it gets in, and then it's gonna really like slam to a stop. So you can see that happening. It kind of just gets really fast and then stops. You can also exaggerate even farther. So for example, I could pull this value. If I pull this like up here, it's actually going to go past the keyframe. So it's actually going to go a little bit lower and then pop in. So you can really add to the expressiveness of your animations this way. It gives you a lot of control, not just of where the animations go to, but also the sort of quality that they get there. So let's, I actually kind of like that. Let's leave that here, and then let's click on this guy and make that a Bezier. And then let's just slow down the beginning. So if I want this to go slower, I want fewer values over time. So I want it to go long like that. The change over time basically is, you know, the sort of like steeper the slope, more change, and the more even the slope, there's going to be less change. So now we get this really slow in and then this bounce at the end. So that's kind of cool. We can go back to our regular mode and you can see it's kind of changed the way these keyframes look. If I want to get rid of this separate values, I can turn that off. So we just have a couple keyframes and then we've got our circle. So let's zoom back out and look at the whole animation again. Okay, so not perfect. I would probably play around with that a little bit more, but that's a little bit more interesting. And now we kind of have this like a little bit more of a realistic or more of a kind of funny quality. So there's a lot of different things you can use that for to get more naturalism out of your animation. All right, so I'm gonna stop there. That's all the new content. In the next video, I'm gonna go over how to export your video and submit your project on OpenLab and then Blackboard.